Hello, this is Stuart Tan from the Aurora Life channel. Welcome to the channel, and I'd like to introduce you to the entire concept known as the inner shadow. Now, most of you may have studied a little bit about personal development, spiritual growth. Today's topic is going to gear towards personal growth as well as spiritual growth. Now, the key thing about a shadow is this. When you're encountering a shadow, usually it's because you're facing away from the light. Now, think about it. The light is shining behind you, straight in front of you, you see that shadow. Now, how does this impact us? If every single day you're looking at what seems to be a negative shade of you, you're likely to view yourself as negative. And as a result, it's important to begin on a journey to explore the shadow. Now, what do I mean by this? There have been many texts that have talked about fighting with inner demons, fighting with inner darkness. I prefer to use the concept of shadow because technically a shadow is neutral. Because when you take a look at a shadow that's right in front of your path, you don't think of it as good or evil or negative. Instead, if you're looking at vilifying yourself, you can call yourself having inner demons. And unfortunately, that requires a little bit more exorcism, and we'll deal with a little bit more about that concept in a subsequent video where we talk about how to create boundaries, right, to deal with invitation of these kinds of energy demons. Anyway, let's talk more in depth about the shadow. So if you want to get out of the shadow, there are only two ways to do it. Number one is to live with the fact that the shadow is there and accept that the shadow is a part of you. The second thing is to move closer into the light, because the moment you go into the light, there will be no need for a shadow anymore. In fact, there will only be a very finite spot where you actually see a shadow if your entire world is filled with light. So let's talk about the shadow and how you can utilize the shadow. So the first part of this entire conversation is about how you can accept the shadow, right, as part of yourself. The other one is to step into the light, because once you're able to accept your shadow, you need not be afraid of the shadows anymore. The second thing is to step into the light, because some people will argue, hang on, if I step into the light, there will be no shadow if I'm surrounded by light. Well, that's true. Then what about if you're in absolute darkness? And the truth is, you can go that way if you want, but that's not necessarily going to be pleasant, because we are beings of light. Our DNA helix is filled with photonic charges that are being emitted on a second-to-second basis. So we are beings of light. We really have no place for that shadow. So let's start off with stage one. Stage one of being able to accept the shadow. So let's say you didn't have any confidence, right? You were lacking the sense of courage in yourself, and you're always questioning yourself. Now, the challenge is to recognize that a lack of confidence sometimes is useful to you. In neuro-linguistic programming, we call this reframing. So I am fearful. Why? Maybe because I feel I'm not prepared. In which case, isn't that shadow useful to you? Because now you're starting to realize, oh, I'm not prepared. I need to start thinking about what needs to be done in order to be more prepared. Again, sometimes that uncertainty causes you to come to reflect upon more of yourself. For example, take for instance the whole confidence issue again. I lack courage because I can't tell the future. In which case you might come to a resolution that, hang on, there are many things that I cannot tell. Worrying about this and being anxious and being fearful of this doesn't serve any purpose for me. As a result, I will have to take it wherever it goes. So this is one of the reasons why, by simply stepping inside of that and accepting whatever is to come, will allow you an opportunity to reconcile with the shadow, not necessarily to just cast it out, because that will be impossible. Now, I'd like you to imagine that you're in a room and in front of you is a veil, right? And you can't quite see what's on the other side of the room, but this other side of the room is where you should be. And if this veil makes whatever's on the other side of the room look like there are monsters behind it, you're doing some kind of play on your own thoughts and your interpretations, right? So any shadowy figure that's in the background, it could have been your mother, but it looks like a ghost. All you need to do is to peel past that veil in order to open up your mind. You can't hide the veil. You can't destroy it. You can't take it down. That is like amputation, right? So you need to be courageous enough to part that veil and to recognize that whatever's on the other side has got some value. So in meeting ourselves, we come to recognize that there are many, many archetypes. And we won't talk about archetypes here, but there are very significant ways of viewing yourself symbolically, and to understand that there are certain representations and analogies and metaphors of life that, according to Carl Jung, came from the collective unconscious that allows you to do greater, deeper self-reflection in order to get to the places where you want to go. So if you have been angry all the time, okay, and this huge amount of rage, just like the Incredible Hulk, is just waiting to be triggered like a raw nerve, then you might want to ask yourself, what is this anger for or about? And as you peel through that veil, you might come to discover that maybe that anger, number one, was modeled from sources outside of you. And these experiences require discernment for you to recognize that you can return it back to sender. Or the second thing would be to say, okay, there's something that you have not yet resolved that you need to think about, resolve, and then come to an alignment within yourself so that that anger is no longer needed or required. Anger can also be called upon as a force of justice, for example. So you see that a particular town isn't very conscious of the environment, and you decide, hey, I'll stay in this town and I will rally the people to take care of the environment because our next generation is going to rely on that. So you might have a certain kind of justified anger, and you might utilize that as a means of co-opting people into a vision that is clearer and that we're wasting a lot right now. Okay? So what I mean by that shadow is it's not a demon. It is not something to vilify. It's something to recognize that you're misinterpreting. So if you see that shadow in anger, fear, anxiety, sadness, you need to be able to co-opt it into your existence and recognize its value before you can move on with any kind of lesson. Now, come to think of it, many of the shadow experiences that we have in our lives are a result of recurring cycles. And I talked a little bit about this in terms of recurring cycles, but I might do a separate video that talks in depth about cyclical repetition of your issues in life, as I personally have experienced myself. What I'd like you to recognize is that every single time you shove your shadow aside, it's going to come back and it's going to become more apparent to you. And the more you attempt to numb it, all you're doing is you're trying to make everything else darker so that you don't see the shadow. That doesn't quite make sense, right? And the more you do that, the more likely that shadow is going to trip you up. So my recommendations, when you're attempting to co-opt your shadow, think about it, confront your shadow first. What is it there for? What is it a window to? What possible benefit does it have for being present in your life, whether it's anger or anxiety, or whether it's this sense of jealousy or the sense of arrogance, right? There's so many different ways to cut it. You've got to think about the way by which you've behaved and then ask yourself, how do other people interpret it? And that might be part of the process of confronting your shadow. Then, once you've come to accept it and to recognize that it is a part of you, be aware of it. Think about it. Ask it what message it has. In fact, as you sit down and do some meditation, some shadow work is about sitting down with your shadow and asking it for its purpose and its intention for you. And think of it from the standpoint of not just sabotaging you or sabotaging your chances, but rather it is a part of you. It is an integral part of you, and it's just acting up because you haven't really listened to it yet. So consider that. The second part, which has got to do with stepping into the light. Now, this is probably every spiritual seeker's journey: ascension, elevation, enlightenment. So in order for us to be able to be in the light, we need to first of all co-opt those shadows and recognize how they can be used for good, and to constantly chase after the light, recognizing that whenever shadows are being cast, they are just part of the process, right? And until we're able to become luminous beings, people who are through and through, in fact, when we allow our own light to shine, that automatically diffuses some of these negative connotations with the shadow, and it brings you to a point where there is no shadow, there is only light. For example, you may know some people who have encountered a huge amount of disappointment, betrayal, negativity, death, pestilence, suffering in their lives, right? And when you encounter such people and they're constantly doing the things that are of their vision, the way they see the future, Mother Teresa comes to mind, for example, who's assisting people in spite of the fact that there is pain and there is suffering. And she is in that pain and that suffering and shining a light right there. And she's neither fazed nor unfazed by it. She just knows that there's something there and it refuels a purpose in her life. So I want you to think about it in that way. Have you envisaged and visioned something? Because the presupposition of vision requires light, right? What are you shedding light on? What is your vision and how are you moving towards it? Is it a better society? Is it a better family? Is it a better way by which justice prevails? Is it a better lifestyle for the poor? And so on and so forth. What is your vision? For me, to step out of the shadow, and I haven't obviously done that yet, but moving closer towards the light for me is about envisaging a world where people are elevated from their suffering and their pain. Now, in order for that to happen, I need to be able to experience what that suffering is and that pain is, maybe unjust or otherwise, but to be able to elevate myself from those pains, whether it's death, whether it's injustice, betrayal, and so on and so forth, to elevate myself and to show people how that can be done as well. Now, that's not so easy, as you can tell. It takes a toll individually, but this form of human experience doesn't come easily. It's not something you can read in a book. It's something that you've experienced and calls people together in order for them to celebrate that, no, you're not broken. Life has not broken you. You're just encountering part of that process. Just like a gemstone being sharpened, and I'll talk about this at greater length in a different video, that we are constantly being excavated out of the ground. Our own internal gems are being excavated out of ourselves, and we have to put it to the grinding wheel. We have to polish it. We have to bring out the color and the light from within. Now, the only way to do that is to recognize that we have a lot of stuff that we have yet to excavate. There's a lot of experience. I call this the school of life. How can we ignore the past experiences that we had when it is so rich in offering us wisdom? And remember, not everybody does this. Not everybody can move into the light because maybe their key interest is not about seeking wisdom or seeking spirituality. Maybe their role in life is to seek materialism, which is fine. And obviously capitalism requires a little bit of materialism. And someone who's able to buoy the economy enables those who are spiritual seekers to hone their craft, to do what they need to do. So in order for that to happen is to recognize once again that you have your own light to shine. What is your vision of the future? Is it eradicating poverty? Is it removing suffering, physical suffering? Is it removing emotional and psychological suffering? Is it something else? Whatever that might be, it forms up the DNA of your inner light that must then come out and shine. And anything that is done other than supporting the light is going to contribute to moving away from it, thereby creating the shadow. So you understand the irony of it. If you don't embrace your vision and your direction that has been granted to you by the universe, what's going to happen is you're moving further away from the light, and that light's going to cast a deeper shadow that's creeping up behind you. So I hope that you can utilize this as a means to reflect upon how further you can go. I've had situations where people have treated me unfairly, people who have betrayed me, but I've also had a lot of love from people, compassion, friends who've stood by me through and through, community members who are caring enough to draw other community members together, and so on. What is your calling? What is your direction? And I hope that this will give you some insight for your subsequent reflection. So go ahead, pause this video, do your own inner work, do your own inner reflection, and I'll see you in a subsequent video. So, did you learn anything from that video? If you did, just give it a thumbs up and then click on the subscribe button and hit the notifications icon so that you and I will continue to stay in touch and I can provide you with updates whenever we have new videos.